Hello and welcome to Dr. Etta Hollins. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kim Vachon, and I'm a PhD student in the education department at UC Santa Cruz. We are so happy that you are here to talk about your perspectives on and predictions about teacher education. Your significant contributions to the field of education are too numerous to recount in this introduction, but briefly, you have served as a classroom teacher, administrator, consultant, and scholar, particularly focused on improving teaching and learning for urban and underserved students. You have given many keynote speeches, received numerous awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Education Research Association, and have authored important books such as Teaching to Transform Urban Schools and Communities and Culture in School Learning. Notably, you have a new book coming out this month entitled Rethinking Teacher Preparation Program Design. This book provides a framework for designing a high-quality, academically robust pre-service teacher preparation program that empowers teachers with the skills and depth of knowledge required to become adaptable, responsive K-12 teachers. I know I'm looking forward to reading this as soon as it comes out. So without further ado, let's dive into the questions. So first, what changes stand out to you since you began in teacher education?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. I have been in the profession itself uh, for more than 55 years. So I've been able to see 55 years of change. So let me just kind of put this into some kind of a historical perspective. When I was a senior in college, that was the year that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And the following year, I received my first teaching contract when Lyndon Baines Johnson was president. And so that began a new era of focus on low income, underserved children as a part of that whole war on poverty. And as you know, at that point in time, we were, still actively involved in the civil rights movement. So that kind of is the context in which I entered. So if we were to talk about what happened and how that impacted teacher preparation, we would have to look at the fact that when I came into the profession, the view of underserved populations, urban, ethnic minorities, was really a very deficit perspective. Poverty was the explanation for underperformance. There was a correlation between income and performance in school, and that was really believed to be pretty predictable and stable. So, one of the biggest contributions that I think that teachers and teacher educators have made over my career has been in the area of promoting equity and social justice. And for historical perspective, it would be important to point out that the National Teachers Association, which was a white female organization, um, actually was very actively opposed to slavery. It was actively opposed to boarding schools for Native American children. And later, when that organization became the National Education Association, it was even more active. Members of that organization participated actively in the civil rights movement. They engaged in marches, they engaged in providing housing for other activists. And at the time when the NEA actually the NEA was formed in around 1857. The AFT was formed in about 1919. And when the AFT came on board, it also actively engaged in the support of equity and social justice. And the AFT filed an amicus brief uh, in support of the plaintiffs in the Brown versus Topeka case. So teachers have a long history of engagement in the civil rights movement and in the fight for equity and social justice. So the thing that, when I think about what it is that I feel most proud of as a teacher and a teacher educator, it is that activity. And looking at that activity over the course of 50 years to see where it has brought us, to see the kind of change that that effort has generated in education. We can see it in the curriculum in K-12 schools. We can see it in the pedagogy in K-12 schools, and we can see it in the requirements for pre-service teacher preparation, where every teacher preparation program has to address issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so these are things that have changed over the course of my career. And teacher educators, following on the model coming from teachers, have really engaged in the scholarship and research that promotes equity and social justice. And the people who have participated in that and have contributed to it are too numerous to name. I would leave out somebody really important if I tried naming those individuals. But that movement means that teachers and teacher educators have really taken very seriously the role of education in the preservation of a democratic society and in the promotion of a democratic society. So that has been like one of the really major changes that has occurred over the course of my career. Of course, there have been other changes, like accountability has been like a major effort, like accountability for the learning in P-12 schools, accountability for the preparation of pre-service teachers. Those have been really important movements. Another really important movement has been the move away from laboratory schools as sites for the preparation of pre-service teachers in terms of clinical experiences toward what we now refer to as professional development schools. And there's a really significant difference in terms of what those two entities did, and kind of like the difference is primarily the function. Like the function of the lab school also included a research component, right? And much of what has happened with the professional development schools is kind of like a repeat of some of the major things that were involved in the lab school, except it has been much more difficult for the professional development schools to be able to close that gap between what goes on in classrooms in universities and what goes on when pre-service teachers are engaged in a clinical experience. Now that's one of the things I think we need to go back and take a kind of a look at, that historical thing. I'm the product of a lab school in my pre-service teacher preparation. So I have a really good understanding of what that experience did for me as a teacher in my preparation as compared to what I see happening in professional development schools. Those are kind of the major changes that I have seen over the course of my career that really get my attention. And out of all of them, I would really emphasize the equity social justice focus that has been like a laser focus for teachers and teacher educators over the course of the 50 years. That doesn't mean that everybody has done it, but there's been a large attention, and it has been one of the most consistent areas of focus in the profession.
Thank you so much for that inspiring perspective and just the wealth of knowledge and just that you've seen over time. That's really, yeah, that's really amazing to hear that whole trajectory. I was wondering if you could actually talk a little bit more about that difference between the lab schools and the professional development schools, and how you see what you thought you got out of your experience in pre-service education that is different from the professional development schools.
Well, I actually got my teacher preparation at a teacher's college. That was the focus, okay? So the primary focus was on the preparation of teachers. And we had two lab schools on the campus. One was a high school and one was an elementary school. The relationship between the faculty in teacher preparation and the teachers in the lab schools was very, very close. I did secondary history, and my cooperating teacher knew as much about what went on in my coursework as I did. So my cooperating teacher, also did work in the university, right? Because the high school was right on the campus. And so my clinical experience began early, meaning that I could observe in the classroom. We had video, well, actually, we had closed circuit TV. Where we could actually watch in real time what was going on in classrooms in our courses, okay? So there was a seamlessness in that experience. One of the things that was required prior to going off campus for student teaching was that we had to demonstrate a particular level of competence in the lab school before we could even go off the campus to do the student teaching. It is that kind of seamlessness, that kind of influence on the context that in some instances with the professional development school is lost because the professional development school is under the control of the school district when the lab school was under the control of the university. And so there didn't need to be the kind of agreements, the MOUs that we work at now, trying to find that common ground. The common ground was built into the fact that it was a lab school and it had a particular purpose. And part of that purpose was the preparation of pre-service teachers. The other thing that was true was that the students who were in college high were actually supportive of pre-service teachers. They were patient. They expected to have pre-service teachers coming through their classrooms all the time. They understood how to engage in conversations. They understood what it was that they need to communicate to the pre-service teacher that would actually be helpful. So the students were a part of that whole process too, which is again something that you don't necessarily get in a professional development school. You have to really work at that. I mean, some universities get that, but I think there are a lot that don't quite get to that point in terms of the professional development schools.
Mhm. Yeah, it makes sense that it eliminates that disconnect between the university and the school system that the teacher is, the
Yes,
pre-service teacher is in.
yes.
So given that, where do you see teacher education going?
Where do I see teacher preparation going? I think that's a really important and interesting question. I think that while we have spent a considerable amount of time working on equity and diversity, um, there are many aspects of equity and diversity that are still very much a challenge and that we still work on a great deal. Like we have discrepancies in the academic performance of urban and other underserved populations. We still have to work that through. We've come a long way, but we still have to work that through. We still have issues with the social context in public schools, which has to do with the relationship between the teachers and the children and the relationships among the children. So we still have to really very much work on that kind of an issue. Ultimately, I think that we have a ways to go in terms of uh, refocusing our energy on pedagogy and hone in our expertise in pedagogy so that we're able to actually get high outcomes from all of the children, irrespective of their background or their parents' engagement or any other constraints, that we can better adapt our pedagogy to the situation, to the needs of the particular students. And we have done a lot of work and we have come a very long way, but I think we still have a ways to go. And I see that as a part of what is in our future in terms of the work we need to do. I think there are other things in teacher ed that need a lot of attention, and I think some of that's represented in the new book, Rethinking Teacher Preparation Program Design, where we're talking about such things as the alignment across courses, the alignment between courses and field experiences, where we're talking about coherence, consistency, continuity. We're talking about a developmental sequence where candidates are responsible for developing and demonstrating certain levels of competencies at particular levels as they move through the clinical experiences. We're talking about a closer alignment of academic knowledge to practice, talking about candidates learning academic knowledge and how to contextualize that academic knowledge to practice, talking about the relationship between the cooperating teacher and the content knowledge or the academic knowledge that the candidate is learning to apply, and what that cooperating teacher brings to the table in terms of the knowledge of the context of the school, the knowledge of the background experiences and needs of the children, the knowledge of the culture and the community from which the children come, and the knowledge of the district policies, etc., that the candidates will have to adapt their pedagogy and their knowledge for. And so we have, I think, a road ahead of us, but I see that the kind of work that we have done in the past and the way that we have learned to build upon each other's work, I think that we can move forward in terms of the redesigning of pre-service teacher preparation and in the honing our ability to adapt our academic knowledge to the context and the needs of the students. I think we're quite capable of doing that. And I think that's the future that's ahead of us.
So, given that response, I mean, what do you think are some of the steps that teacher education needs to start taking to attain what you were just describing, to see those kinds of teachers having that kind of knowledge in the classroom? What do you see like the first steps for teacher preparation to kind of shift towards that?
Well, I think that some of that work is already underway. I think that if we look at accreditation standards that are set by state departments of education, and if we look at the accrediting bodies for teacher education, we will see that those agencies or are helping, they are supporting us in moving forward. They are putting forth requirements that say that we need to do some of these things. And so I think the way that we move towards state and national accreditation is helpful. I think that the first step is for us to, how should I say, engage seriously in what those agencies indicate that we need to do. I think that sometimes, in some instances, there's a tendency to meet those requirements without meeting the intent of the requirements. And I think we have to get to the point where we're thinking deeply and meeting the intent of those requirements, because I think in many ways they are good guidelines for the steps that we need to take in the future. But I also think there's some other things that we need to do in terms of the preparation of the next generation of teacher educators, okay? And I might be getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I think it's a really important part of this. So when new teacher educators enter from their doctoral programs, there's a lot of enthusiasm. There's a lot of goodwill. But I think that there's not enough mentoring or guidance once those individuals enter the field. And so the tendency in our culture toward individualism tends to dominate. And what we really need is more collective work. So the question that new teacher educators entering the field need to answer is, how does my work fit into the scheme of things in this particular teacher preparation program? You know, how does my research facilitate the learning in the program? How will the course that I teach fit into the developmental sequence? And what is the role of that course? And how will I determine what the impact is of the knowledge and when the knowledge needs to be adjusted to better facilitate the learning that pre-service teachers need? So I think that's a really important piece that needs to be included in the kind of induction of new teacher educators. And I think that's something, although many universities have what they call mentor relationships, I think that's something that we haven't really worked out in a real systematic way. And so I think we need conversations around that as senior faculty and to be able to really engage in a kind of a more robust induction for new faculty.
I really appreciate that bringing the conversation to teacher educators, and something that we talk about a lot in CTRN, just how, we are all hoping to be teacher educators, and that sometimes teacher education programs, people just end up, faculty members just end up in the teacher ed program when they weren't necessarily planning to be teacher educators, but they're in the field of education. And so we've been thinking a lot about how to intentionally come to teacher education as teacher educators. And so I really appreciate that as a response. It makes a lot of sense. And I don't see that or I haven't seen it in my experience, but that kind of leads into our last question, actually, about what you wish you would have known prior to or as you were learning to be a teacher educator.
Well, I think that there are a number of things that might have been helpful because none of the kind of induction that I was talking about was really a part of my socialization. When I entered teacher preparation, we had not even started talking about having a mentor. And so, like I was pretty much on my own to just kind of explore, even to figure out what syllabi had been used for the courses that I was being asked to teach. And part of the problem, as I later came to understand it, was that I actually had the freedom to design the course any way that I chose without particular guidelines for how you start to think about the design of a course. The good news is that, like I had been a middle school history teacher, and I understood how to plan instruction. And so I did that, but that doesn't really account for how that course fit into a developmental sequence or how it was related to the courses that came before or the courses that came after. So that would have been very helpful, not just to me, but it would have been very helpful to the students in terms of bringing continuity and a developmental sequence to their learning and to helping their learning be interdependent and more applicable as they went into practice, or to think about how what I was teaching would actually be a part of the academic knowledge base for teaching and teacher preparation. And so that was something that I had to learn, that is the knowledge base, that is what candidates will know when they go into classrooms to teach the children, and to be able to make that more robust in terms of how you think about the application, how you decide what is appropriate in which context and for which students. So that was something that, like I sort of wish that I had actually known. I think another piece that came a few years in for me was understanding how my research and scholarship could be helpful for my teaching, how to make those things work together so that I would become better as a faculty member facilitating the learning for candidates, as I dealt with the kind of deep thought that went with scholarship, that I was actually thinking about that content and thinking about that pedagogy and consistently improving my own practice, and talking with my colleagues about that practice. And so the other thing that sort of like emerged for me, that in some instances universities I think have started to prepare for, and that is helping candidates to understand how to engage um, a community, a network, or a collaboration of colleagues who are interested in the same thing, and talking through and working on problems and issues together in terms of the scholarship that's being advanced. We can now see that happening more in the field than when I entered. But I think that's something that should be encouraged in doctoral programs, um, so that you get the feel for what that's like, that kind of collaborative work.
Right, and that goes back to what you were saying before, just about how as a society we tend to focus so much on individualism, and especially I think in PhD programs you're also trying to do your thing, and it can be competitive depending on the environment, and it's hard to find those opportunities to really do collaborative work, but also I agree, so important. um, well, those are all the questions that I have. So is there anything that you feel like we missed or you want to make sure that we mention?
Well, I just would like to reiterate the fact that, I take a lot of pride in the equity and social justice work that has been done by teachers and teacher educators. I think the society is a better place because of that work. I think that that whole preservation and promotion of a democratic society is a central function of education, and I think that we have really worked hard to carry that out. I, at this point, would like to see a little bit of a shift so that we now are back to the the curriculum and the pedagogy and the understanding of how to develop the nation's academic and intellectual resources, so that, right now we have shortages in areas of math and science, et cetera, right? And we have some of our students going through school without becoming fully literate. And so I think that it's time for us to maintain the equity, social justice, while increasing our attention to the development of the whole person, academic, social, psychological. So I think that's where I'm hoping that we will kind of not really shift, but we will incorporate that into the work of equity and social justice much more than we have in the past when the society has so much needed us to focus on social justice and equity. That's what we have done. But I think now we can um, increase our focus on the other area of our responsibility.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Hollins, for talking with me today. I've learned so much from this conversation and am really grateful for your work and your insights on teacher education.
And thank you much for having me.
Yeah, of course.